Yep. Well, welcome to the final session, besides the closing ceremony of this awesome conference. I apologize if I feel a little rushed. I just had to run and get a COVID test, but I'm clear, so I'm clean. Masks off. So we have an outstanding lineup today, and we're going to start with Eric Lauzon with the Atlas narrative, a framework to unveil the stories atlases may tell us.
Yeah, hello everybody. Today I want to take on a topic we were talking about yesterday, and there's something that sits in between our knowledge and cartography and our products that we disseminate, that we distribute, like atlases, for example. So I take on atlases, and I would like to give you an idea on a framework after kind of humble defining a concept or two concepts of the narrative. I will dig into a framework on aspects of an atlas narrative. So it's all a little bit more conditional, means that this is work in progress, so 80% of the framework are done, but I still need to test, and you are the test today for me. The goal is, of course, to deconstruct the atlas narrative by looking into atlases. And so the idea behind the narrative is that it, as Lyotard provides a vehicle through which we come to understand the world and ourselves and making communication possible. That means that we have small elements, small pieces of stories, small ideas that we need to exchange our ideas. And if you look in this in the lower right, what is a narrative? A narrative can say that you have a paradigm, like the liberalism. It's a big word, big thing, and that's a paradigm. But nobody really understands what liberalism means. If you go to people and ask them what is liberalism, you will get certain definitions, but people have another story for that. They say this is the principles of freedom. And between this humble understanding of principles of freedom and this meta idea of liberalism, there you can build narratives. And one of the narratives between liberalism and the principles of freedom is the American dream, for example. So the American dream is an example for a narrative that connects paradigms to basic understanding. Who wrote this very nice book on the mythologies, where he deconstructs the pictures of the pictures and the products and the humanities that society builds. He deconstructs these pictures, and he says we can do that. We can take apart these pictures. We can take apart the picture of this very iconic French car, and can get into what narrative has this car. Why is it a French, so iconic French car? How come this to be? And his way is to kind of get the ideas and the stories about that car, and then to deconstruct it. That means to split up the small stories and look into the text as he looks in a text. If you would do a grammatic analysis, and so grammatic analysis is something that we try to do with this, or I would try to do with this framework. And probably there's another thing now. We do this grammatical analysis, so we have this text element, we have sentences, we have part of sentences, conditional sentences, that have a meaning, and they all come together to a novel. But in between, again, these text elements generate narrative elements that then, in a whole, become the novel. So the thing to look into the narrative is to identify internal structural elements, for example, of atlases. And these structural elements are, of course, part in the basic for a narrative in their different combinations. We know some structural elements for quite a long time, like the sequence of maps in an atlas, or the extent of maps in an atlas. And this is a visualization of Mitchell's Universal Atlas from 1853. So you have kind of the sequence of the maps. Just need to find the right one. The sequence of the maps. So you have the world maps, you have the US maps, and then South America. So a typical American atlas. And if you go dig deeper into it, then this splits, of course, up to get a more in-depth sequence, like the North American continent, the countries or regions, and then the provinces and states. And this gives you an idea of how is this kind of atlas is organized. So it's all, in all its parts organized to go from overview into detail. So that would be a sequence. And of course, the extent of the maps on these different continents is quite important to understand what story has been told through this atlas. So we come to that later again. And if you look into like the North American or the US maps, the state maps are in a certain sequence, and you can study these sequences. What story is told here? But interestingly, the early US world atlases start with the 13 founder states always, if they have the sequence. So these are very, very important. We are based on this founder state, and that's something like a narrative, an American narrative that you can find by just looking into the sequence. But there are external elements, like the society. How does society contribute to atlas ideas, and how do atlases, of course, influence society? And of course, how are atlases produced? And you can analyze this qualitatively or empirical. So doing this kind of what Ian Muehlenhaus once called the banal cartography, so counting maps. I'm doing that as well, but you always have to do a qualitative analysis of this as well. So starting with two levels for the analysis of the atlas narrative, there's a micro level with visualization modes. We know that we can take maps apart by applying certain techniques that are used to make this map. So really to deconstruct the map on the basis of the system, the visualization system, like the graphic variables that are used. Of course, we come across different things. So these are two atlases. One is a war atlas. So like the meaning of coloring, we have to dig deeper into it. Jack Barton doesn't tell us the meaning of colors. The meaning of colors are inscripted by the map maker. And this is an atlas of 1916 on this one. So the enemy is red. And the good ones, it's a German atlas from a German perspective, the good ones, probably the bad ones, are blue. So, but 2 years later, this completely changes. So after the Treaty of Versailles, we have this kind of ethnographic maps, revanchist ethnographic maps coming up that contradict the bordering that was the outcome, the problematic outcome of the Treaty of Versailles. And we have this map in a Polish atlas where we are the red. So you have the Carte Rouge, which is quite, probably some of you know, which is an ethnographic map of Hungary. And we have the red map, which is a ethnographic map of Germany. And always red is then the we, not be any more. So this is encrypted in the maps, and of course you have to, if you want to unveil a narrative, you have to dig into that as well. So we have a meso level. Wow. We have a meso level, which is quite interesting. These are the structural elements, and if we look into these at this level, we are now analyzing this sequence of maps and what is in the maps, but this is not actually the point. We need more to analyze the narrative. And here comes John Bryan Harley with his idea of deconstructing the map, where he says that for the analysis, he proposed a distinction between external and internal power in cartography. And so we need to reflect on this, on this external power. So we have another level, the macro level, which reflects production and processes, production milieus that you can identify, and we have a meta level. So the atlas is produced, and it's kind of communicating. It's used in the society. It's a communication method. If you look at school atlases, quite a strong and powerful communication of spatial ideas that then are distributed through school. And if you look at the meso level, which is the structural elements, I identified, with the help of Roland I identified different ways of structural elements that I looked into, like division. A strong division means, for example, the National Atlas, you have a thematic division over volumes, or you have a thematic divisions over chapters, or you have the spectrum. What kind of visualizations are used? Always one kind of one color, or like in this atlas of Reis, where he has a very nice description of all the countries and the continents, and then says, and these are the problems of the world. And he completely changes the way he visualizes. So he has a really large and strong spectrum of different visualizations to show his narrative. I really have problems with that one. And the amalgames, just shortly, how are these visualizations and text and different visualizations are related to each other? If they are really related, like in this atlas, which is the German National Atlas, you have chapters, and these maps and graphs are all related. In a normal world atlas, you have a map of France, then comes the map of Luxembourg, then comes the map of Spain, but they are not related. They are on the same planet, of course, but they are not related with each other. So this is another way to look into atlases. And this comes then into one of these matrices where I just took the order. The order is strong if you have strong spatial, if you have a dominant spatial order. And weak if you have an existing but not dominant thematic order in the atlas. And no or none means for temporal order, means there is no temporal order. It's not an historical atlas. So you can identify and can relate all of these elements. And if you do an overview, which is quite nice, then you might identify atlases that are called world atlases, but they aren't, like this one here. So, and with this kind of this thing is crazy. With this kind of visualization here, you just take the first line, like the order line, and then you find out that except for this both, they have all a very strong spatial order. But this has a methodical order, which means there is no order that you really can identify. So the author did something, or the authors did something completely different. And this is something to dig deeper in. This is a pattern to look into the atlas. Is it really a world atlas, or what is it about? If you identify these patterns, then this gives you an idea of what you could use. So I did this kind of analysis for 82 US American world atlases of the second part of the 19th century. And I came across different things like a pattern like that, and then you think about, well, there needs to be something, and you look into the methodical order, and this is what comes out. So the order of the states gives you a narrative of how the US has been perceived in 1891. You have the industrialized North, and you have the heartland with the Great Plains, and then you have the struggling South, because no industrialization and a Great Depression in the or in the southern states, and you have the Western expansion, and that is the order that is shown by maps. So this shows a narrative, or more than one narrative. I go over these ones, so you can take this kind of key issues or narratives of American politics, and they are reflected in these kind of atlases. And I hear your clock, and I just struggling with this one. And if you look at what kind of maps, what amount of maps, we're going back to the counting maps, have been used, you see differences when a narrative appears, and that gives, for this system, gives me the feedback that if I can identify certain orders, for world atlases of the US, they are mostly according to the dominant narratives of that time. And I'm still struggling with this one. Just shortly, the other thing you could do, you go a level higher on the macro level, production. And if you go into production, I took the production milieu, so the fabrication milieu, which means how are the atlases produced, what influences the production. But I took some of the school atlases and I looked into the different conditions under which school atlases are produced. So this is a macro level. Why is an atlas produced like that? Because, for example, the Swiss School Atlas is on behalf of the government and academically accompanied and edited, published atlas by a private publishing house, private-public partnership. If you look at the German atlases, so they need to be approved by a commission on education. So there are just some companies that get this approval. Not everyone can produce a school atlas. You need to have the approval that the atlas is used in schools. If you look into the States, like the Goodest World Atlas is one of the most dominant school atlases in the US, it competes with atlas from all international publishers because there is no regulation. You can use whatever atlas you like. And mostly this is based on the school district. Like school district can decide what school atlases use. These are different use cases, different milieux under which these atlases are produced. I skipped the part on toponymy to come to the end. The meta level, the society, is quite interesting as well. So under what conditions, societal, are these atlases produced? And we had the national atlases yesterday, and I was coming up with this thing that nation doesn't mean nation. Nation doesn't mean nation state. It can mean kind of a descending community, which means the belonging to an ethnic community that has a common language, common culture, common history, very dangerous. Or it can be a belonging community. That means you have a state and there are so many different groups in it, which then build a different type of nation. There will be a different national atlas, of course. The one is exclusive. So we are that group, not the others. And the other is, well, we have all the groups in our territory. So these are two different kinds of national atlases. And if you then look into an analysis of the forwards of atlases, you can identify what they are made for. Like the National Atlas of Gagauzia, where from the forward you get the idea that this part of Moldova just wants to get independent to join Russia again. This is what you get from the forward, but nobody reads the forward, and unfortunately the large collectors skip the forward. And this is the picture which I would love to show. These are all the autonomous regions or regions that want to become autonomous and independent in Europe. And they are all working on a kind of their own narrative, which they try to distribute through maps, through probably a national atlas that was called regional atlas before, but it is a national atlas in a different meaning than we have it when we look into the not anymore valid definition of national atlas by Salicev from the 1960s. I applied that to apply this kind of really related to each other system to analyze the famous Atlas of Finland. And this one, so publication history, publication process, forward, gazetteers, toponyms, what toponyms have been used. I looked into the reviews, and the outcome of the narrative was that this is an atlas of a bourgeois elite striving for the detachment of their territory, of the already defined administrative area in the Tsar Empire, in order to advance possibilities of an independent capitalist valorization of Finland as a national state. So this is the narrative behind, from my analysis, that I found behind this first edition of the National Atlas of Finland from 1899. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. And actually, thank you, Eric. My brain is exploding, and I have so many questions. So I was typing up a ton. I can't wait for the discussion.
I'm sorry for being.
Thank you. It happens. So next, actually, I'm excited to introduce Malak Alasli, and she's going to discuss the toponyms of the Maghreb and their presentation in Hungarian School Atlases.
Thank you. Okay, so my presentation about the toponyms of the Maghreb region and their presentation in Hungarian School Atlases. So it is known that names in general yield a linguistic frame of reference, and that place names in particular possess a human-like feature in the sense that they evolve and change. So the need of this study is a reference for knowing the correct pronunciation, the correct place name pronunciation. And the purpose is to have a better identification of the place in question, and that is by preventing ambiguities and asserting more respect to the heritage, which can be achieved indeed by conforming to the right use of the place names, both in written and oral practice. Identifying, analyzing, and normalizing place names and their variants is very valuable in certain applications. For instance, dictionaries for human translators, machine translation, segmentational analysis, morphological analysis for, let's say, French Arabic text to Hungarian texts, and even as a database for gazetteers. So there are many ways that geographical names can vary, and because of this really large amount of variations, it is not unreasonable for a single geographical place to have different ways of textual representation. Now, this textual representation may cause variation in textual representation, may cause problems in research, in search, for instance, of a certain source. Let's say, for instance, I want to do a full text search, and when only one variant is shown, then the other variants which are connected to it will not be introduced into the final result. So to enable a quality geographical research, the information retrieval system that uses, for instance, cross-reference or a semantic web should automatically link the place name and their variations to provide the better quality geographical research. So the toponyms are of the Maghreb region, which are Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. They're in North Africa. No political borders, just Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. These countries present a rich toponymic patrimony or heritage in the sense that they have different references in the process of nominating and denomination of their places. They have experienced ancient civilizations of different cultures, different origins, different traditions, which will be seen in the linguistic situation that is present in this region, which is a multilingual situation. We have two main languages, which are the language of the immediate environment of the everyday encounters and situations, which are Berber or Amazigh or any Arabic dialect, for instance, Darija, Moroccan Darija, which is not really purely Arabic if you listen to it. It's a combination of French, Spanish, Berber, and Arabic all combined, so it's very different than standard Arabic, because illiterate people who speak Moroccan dialect, for instance, may not understand standard Arabic. And the other two are standard Arabic and French, which are the languages of the writing and the elite. And to a certain extent, we also have Spanish in certain regions, for instance, in the north, that is still present in the toponymy itself. Well, this multilingual situation is also seen in the official toponymy present in this region, which allows for bilingual transcription, mainly French, official French variant and Arabic variant. But the choice of the toponym variant is not really consistent in the sense that sometimes the choice depends on the specific context where we want to use those toponyms. Sometimes it's the linguistic context, especially. For instance, in cadastral work in Morocco, let's say topographic maps, let's say thematic maps, atlases, there is an overuse of French, mainly French toponyms, so you won't see Arabic. There is very minimal usage of Arabic, standard Arabic officials or maps in Arabic in the cadastral office. And now, because we have Berber, and in 2011, Berber, for instance, in Morocco has become official, as in this official language, we have an introduction to it. So you may see it sometimes in, for instance, maps used there as a third variant. You can also see it sometimes, as you can see here, in street maps, which are very interesting. If you go through Morocco, you will see the presence of this variant in the regions that are either prone to Berber tourism or that where the majority are Berber origin. So they want to please the nation by introducing a third variant. The common one is the French, the bilingual French and Arabic, and for instance, for street names, a translation of the general, for instance, from Zanqa to Rue. There's also a unique presence of Spanish still in a region in the north, in Chefchaouen, where there is still a bilingual transcription, which is interesting, but it's not from French to Arabic, but it's from Spanish to Arabic, and it's still present. It's not only this, but the bilingual transcription is also very prominent when it comes to the local or the vernacular toponym used, which, for instance, a city in the north has an official French and Arabic name, but the local one is the previous Spanish variant that was used. So because the work is on Maghrebian toponyms, but their presentation specifically on Hungarian school atlases, it was important to present a brief history about it. The first Hungarian school atlas that was published in Debrecen by Professor Budai was in 1800s, and it contained 12 pages. And 17 years later, Edward published a small 10-page atlas titled Hungarian School Atlas. Sorry, I forgot to show you. This is the Budai atlas. And in 1845, an astronomer, a Hungarian astronomer, Antal Valos, made a new school atlas of 18 pages that was for newspaper readers and pupils. In Hungary, there was a tendency between 1845 and 1890 where foreign school atlases, mainly from German-speaking countries, were adapted and translated into Hungarian for use in school. For instance, and later on in 1890, a cartographer Mano Kugotovic founded the Hungarian Geographical Institute, which was responsible at that time for producing school atlases. And 1 year later, the Hungarian Geographical Society established a school atlas commission. So some years later, in 1906, Kugotovic, in collaboration with Bella, made a map booklet for Kurdir elementary grade school, and which was followed by another similar book for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Mano's publication has been considered a milestone in the production of Hungarian school atlases. This is an example of Balázs, and this is an example of Mano's Kugotovic atlases. So the methodology that was used is of three parts. The first one was descriptive theoretical analysis. It's a long name, but it mainly means that we gather relevant sources or relevant data from various sources. In this case, the source was Hungarian School Atlases. The choice of a school atlas was mainly because people may meet for the first time foreign place names in school. So there is an influence of the first exposure to those place names. And only geographical atlas were used because historical atlases in principle should show the place name as it was used in that specific time. The second method is Documentalist Methodology, which mainly just we need to interpret the data to be able to gather or to obtain empirical knowledge. So there were some points that were made, for instance, a very obvious differentiation between the Arabic variant and French. French was in Latin or Roman letters, and Arabic was in the Arab lettering. Each atlas was identified by its title and publication year, which will be easier for instance, other researchers to see which variant in which atlas. And their entries were sorted alphabetically to avoid maybe any political differences. And there was also some variations of the same toponym that was seen in the same atlas. They were shown in the same line included in the parentheses. And the third method was interviews, semi-structured interviews that targeted specifically students of at the Institute of Cartography and Geoinformatics at the Alpha University in Budapest. This target was because these type of students were the most predisposed to foreign place names, especially, let's say, in this case, Arabic foreign place names. The other type of students that were strictly avoided are language majors because they may have more linguistic awareness, which may influence the results indeed. The subjects were first presented with a map that shows the region. There were some questions about the region, so a small introduction was given. Later on, it was explained that this is not a test of proficiency, so we're not expecting them to give an exact or correct pronunciation. They were later on encouraged to read the words as a list, isolated words in a list. They had the time to take whatever time they need to come up with the intended pronunciation they wanted. And the delays were helpful in the sense that I could estimate, not like correctly, but estimate the level of difficulty of certain toponyms. Because, for instance, some students avoided strictly to pronounce certain toponyms up until when the encouragement was like too much. Later on, they had to listen to the correct pronunciation by a native, me, and they were encouraged to repeat the pronunciation. This allows us to notice a difference between pronunciation in the reading and pronunciation in the repeating itself, which can also help us draw a conclusion on the particular influence of spelling and pronunciations. Okay, so the results was a data that contained different points: the official name form, the transcription, the coordinates, the etymology, the standard Hungarian pronunciation, and other points. So the collected variants can be characterized in two different ways. One is, for instance, the collected, whether it describes, for instance, will it follow the Hungarian transcription, the French as international, or a kind of transliteration according to Hungarian practice. We have here some, for instance, examples where we have some orthographic differences, where, for instance, the form has changed either due to decolonization or afterwards. So we made a certain categorization of it. The two major differences are orthographic variants and colonial or historical variants. Orthographic, here's an example. For instance, you can see here, there is a difference of Z and S. Here, for instance, this one, orthographic, these are an example of orthographic variants that were shown. This type of collection or concordance has also allowed us to put certain, for instance, toponyms in a way that we can notice a certain pattern. For instance, here we can see the colors means it's the same variant throughout the years. We can see that a certain tendency to use a certain variant occurred in a certain timeline. It stopped and maybe returned again. So it gave us a certain way to see which atlas was the model for which, or which influence was on those typical atlases. the colonial one. These are some examples, for instance, and the etymology was varying throughout the collected variants. Sometimes they are Spanish naming, or they were a Spanish colony or a Spanish province. Some were Latin naming, some were ancient Berber naming. So we found these variants that were used for those specific colonial variants. Sometimes the etymology was difficult to come up with. For instance, I came up with this one. Where is it? Here, this one, Oran. This variant was only found in 2 atlases, which was interesting because these 2 atlases, the first one of Schumann, was the model of the second, indeed. So it makes sense why, for instance, in this type of atlas, it showed both this variant and this variant. Up until now, I couldn't come up with the exact etymology of this specific variant that was found, and I have a speculation that maybe it's just a spelling mistake, indeed, from the French Ouahran variant. Sometimes the etymology was found in old testimonies or travel books. For instance, here Talent, I'm Moroccan, I've never heard of it, and it was difficult to come up. Even I remember I asked some in the cadastral office back in Morocco, I've never heard of this name, and apparently I found it mentioned in a travel book in the time of 1806, which is relevant here. That was a name given by a certain people that work in a governmental office because it's a residence of a prince. So they wanted to give a different name than the outsider, so that it's not known where it is. And it was mentioned, for instance, here, if by talent this cert is mean, this one I know. So sometimes the etymology can be interesting to find, other times it's challenging to come up with the exact one. There is in transliteration, quickly, there was always an influence of a foreign language, of one language to come up with the foreign language, for instance. Here we have, for instance, the French toponym, the common bad Hungarian pronunciation, and some correct transliteration. One interesting example is this one. We have 3 different pronunciations for the same toponym. The first one can be the reading of the name. The second one, which was shown in a dictionary published by the Hungarian Academy, yes, Hungarian Academy, was maybe influenced by the French Tanger. And the third one, Tanja, maybe, which is found in Cartography, is probably influenced by the Arabic variant. So we could also notice some connections to it. There were some toponyms that were strictly confusing because of the language. They are dissimilar, typologically dissimilar, they are very different. By the way, when I asked them the list, it was in French, so I considered and analyzed the French variant itself, not the Arabic. Both are still different from the Hungarian language, but at least French is somehow closer to it. These were some comments on it, for instance, because we talked about L and L beforehand. So for this specific case of Hungarian students, this variant, AL, was found to be easier than the A with an L. So this one was adopted more than this in the transliteration. There was this word that was avoided to be transliteration for cultural purposes, and sometimes some sounds that were not relevant either in Arabic or French. For instance, kh, which is not in Hungarian, is also available in French as the combination of K and H. That was very uncommon for Hungarians to come up with. Okay, so to finish quickly, I have some recommendations that may help because school atlas have an influence on the students, on the younger people, but also teachers' pronunciation has an even more crucial influence on those foreign name exposure. So, for instance, if it would be very helpful if teachers could at least understand the fundamentals of the pronunciation of Maghrebian place names and even give like a small introduction or description of why they're spelled that way. It would also be interesting if an introductory text is in the book with pronunciation of the Maghreb, which I think this is a bit more challenging because it may require the student to have a linguistic awareness. It would also be interesting if, for instance, there's a unique practice in Hungary where the countries or territories that were under the British rule are written in Hungarian, but the ones that were under French rule is following the French way of writing. So it would be interesting if the students, if the teacher would elaborate on this point and explain, for instance, why if they see the names throughout the Arab region, North Africa included, they will see 2 different ways of transcription of the writing of those place names, that these ones were under French control, so we followed the French way of writing. These were under British control, for instance, and for Hungarian common practice, we followed the Hungarian. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. That's awesome. More questions? So it could be a lively discussion. Next up, we have Daniel Orango and Matias Geda. And the title is The Emerging Roles of Place Names and Thematic Atlases. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a presentation on the roles of place names in the emerging themes, which are found based on the issues of the current atlases which are being made by various organizations and governments. In the themes, we have the maps, which are coming from the atlases, whereby apps are generated from the data obtained from either by correction or using citizen data, which is free open data sources. And services are produced from those production processes from those apps or maps. In atlases, which is known as a combination of either images or data lists of indexes of maps, whether printed or in soft copy. Some are spelled in the Latin alphabet, whereby the writing follows the country-specific orthographies, whereby each country language, domain, official, or minor languages are also spelled either in brackets or in the official standardization of each country. And sometimes some languages have stress marks or italics, which are also following phonetic symbols. And those issues are sorted when the map is produced in different platforms. In the roles of the presidents in these new roles or teams, I was analyzing the teams based on the functions, issues, and the data which is obtained to make the atlases from these different production procedures to be usable based on the perspectives of the organizations and the government, so that the atlases can be usable. And these, the basic traditional themes are sometimes modeled to be different than the new themes. Some find some connection to the traditional classical themes, such that we have administrative areas. Rather than counting on the administrative boundaries, we have the charts, maps, or electoral areas linked to the citizen data, such that the function is for querying that data with respect to visualization and analysis, rather than for information purposes. Also, we have historical setting, whereby these atlas systems are using foreign claims and for naming purposes, such that when you query that this map is not suitable based on historical setups, or maybe after query has been made on why this name is like this. We also have theme of geopolitics, distributions, and descriptions, whereby different groups of people can come out of political strife. They query some atlases and find that it's not fitting, and then they can start to have a distribution nature which can cause names to be changed. You also have functions of mobility and accessibility, whereby transport systems are used in naming, and the standards, whereby some atlases create names which are based on the mobility and access systems based on each atlas of that country. We also have temporal atlases, which reflect the economic resource distributions, which are used for tax corrections, for maybe tax assessment, whether a region is compliant in terms of tax correction or development purposes, especially when the distribution of wealth is being managed. You also have the new theme of geo-narratives, whereby some groups of people come with oral narratives, which want to explain each name on a map based on the histories, which sometimes does not fit to the current domain of where that local name is found, and it finds that the names have to be shifted to fit the definition of those local narratives. And this, up to this extent, these new themes affect such that the functions of these names change such that we have these roles whereby, due to immense data which is obtained from this data correction in terms of names, we have the function of, first we have the function of e-commerce. We also have function of SDI, big data, AI, and Internet of Things, whereby data obtained from names is synchronized to be reflected in a spatial data infrastructure network, and it is connected to all other functions like space science and technology, indexing, cataloging, records, historical, geography, regional organizations, and governments. And each area has a specific application suited for each function of the theme of the atlas. And for each theme, we have each function which the place names work. If it's for government, the names are used for governance, correspondence, documentation, conversation, archiving, reference, and boundary descriptions. And for regional organizations, we find issues of collaborations in treaties, wars, resource sharing like the River Nile, waters, and the straits like the Hormuz Strait. We also have historical geography, whereby the physical distribution of the physical features in the areas are used to localize time and trade mapping, whereby whether the features are monitored to model the climate activities for the effect of monitoring the climate change issues. We also have atlas information systems whereby name variants are monitored in terms of periods or languages. And in this case, we do not have regions which explain when this name changed. In that case, we only have a localized system of Agacetia which can deal on those atlas systems which are based on periods. We have a look on such atlas systems which are based on those indexing systems based on keyless or region-less atlases. We also have specific atlases based on indexing, cataloging records, whereby gazetteers fall on that area, whereby old map references are used for interpretation of those names. And we also have the area of space technology, whereby science and research is used to ambiguate the names and geolocate whether in space to have functions on other applications of air navigation, satellite monitoring, and for things which are existing in the sky, like asteroids and stars. Also, there is SDI, which is a spatial data, which contains all geographic data which can be mapped. And for each of the functions here stated, these are illustrations whereby from the European Urban Atlas, it was compiled in 2018, it shows the areas of governance whereby the areas have names and the descriptions with documentations, and it is archived as an atlas system, and it just visualization of the same. whereby you can click and get the service in terms of either as a web map or you can download it, but it's an atlas system for governance. Also, we have the regional regime, whereby governments come together in groups so that they can collaborate in terms of contracts and inequalities, so that they can monitor the development agenda based on those groups. You can see various organizations based on the comparison from Spatial Mondial Atlas, which is a comparison from another atlas called World Atlas of the Global Issues. And various organizations can be seen at the periods whereby they started the collaboration. We also have historical cartography, whereby various entries of precedents are also indexed, and the functions which they have in terms of heritage. And in terms of historical systems, we all have Uruk Atlas system, which has some functions in terms of indexing and data management, whereby the various functions of maps, data, and query searches can be done in these atlases. These are just examples. There are several atlases which are available. These are just for illustration. We also have indexing systems for atlases, gazetteers, old map references, whereby their interpretation are based on knowledge systems, whereby they use geolocated text and references to have them used to link with spatial data in maps, which can end up in as a layout with other maps, so that it can have some code spaces and connected addresses to trace the address for international conflict resolutions and open data networks. And sometimes they index with the disputed regions, like the Wikipedia search records, in addition to the diplomacy, whereby there is archiving records for monitoring the partners in terms of leadership, geopolitics, and even in fighting for space and warfare. This is an example of a multi-team atlas, whereby it has been done to be a single team atlas, whereby it is only a team for Cs, but with different sub-teams within the modeling of that atlas space. In terms of the atlas systems, one considers whether you can use formal records or PGI records, which are common tier, but one asks, are the visual atlases updated or not? But if not, you can get free data, but is it standardized? That's also another query. We also have in the space industry, whereby we have issues on space and science, geoinformatics, foreign objects, whereby different organizations are carrying some monitoring on the issues based on organization on the issue of space science. There's also some startups on space science, whereby they sum up on indexing, which is indexing 256, which is a company having monitoring all those development in space science, and they sum up displaying that effect. We also have another atlas systems for indexing names and place names based on knowledge systems in space. This is also another indexing system whereby the space is monitored with satellites, rockets, and foreign objects, whereby the names are used in not only in the Earth, the planet Earth, whereby the partners, which I was able to get, is the IAU in partnership with the US, which gets them, whereby the source I got is on the ring. On the spatial data in big data and AI, we have that the citizen data is very core in this area, whereby the image usage, geopolitics, and the addresses linked to these presidents serve very core functions to deliver the management in this big data paradigm, so that it can deliver the linked data services to the community or government. In the e-commerce, we have customers have addresses connected to the address system in the money handling devices like ATMs and ATM cards, whereby each customer has an address. Wherever you use it, wherever you ring it with a mobile phone, these customer addresses are compared with when you use an ordering service in the internet. Then the last team is the one of in-narration through atlas, whereby the example I was using was the reading atlas from Esri, whereby there is the use of oral literature, whereby you support it with maps, whereby some use it with usages, and the appearing based on users, whereby there's no standardization, it's just a user-specific standards. Then for Kenya, we have the status and the changing paradigm. For our case, we have not made atlas because they are still in production. They have usually 10 years, but it has taken like 20. We have not done, but we are about to make one on the 6th edition. We have 5th edition now, but we make the 6th edition soon. And these are the atlas for the previous years, 1st, 3rd, and 5th. And these are indexed maps, but they are all in print format. And these are function of card system, but it is not digital, it's only print format. And in conclusion, we have is that there is need for more documentation to make the atlas system to be updated, and based on the bodies in Kenya, it is for 10 years update is needed, but due to unavoidable circumstances, we are yet to be there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was really enlightening, and actually, so they're doing the 6th edition now, you said?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm excited to chat about that. It's so cool to hear about so many different national atlases all in one venue. So it's really wonderful. Next up is an online participant, Ivana Crljenko, on the analysis of Spanish-Croatian relations based on Croatian world atlases. Are you there, Ivana?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me also.
We can hear you loudly and clearly. Thanks.
Okay, I will try to. Oh, okay, now I can share my screen.
It's being shared.
Do you see anything?
Yep, we see your slides.
Yes, yes. Is it on the full screen, or should I make another?
It's not full screen. It's just the PowerPoint.
Okay, okay. So, hello from Zagreb. The name of my presentation is Analysis of Spanish-Croatian Relations based on Croatian World Atlases. And try to change slide.
Would you like to, I think you have to put,
Okay, I changed the slide, okay. So in this presentation, I will briefly present the research on the Croatian perspective of Spanish-Croatian relations that could be investigated by using the widely accessible cartographic and geographical knowledge about Spain offered to Croats. That is the knowledge provided by Croatian 19th to 21st century world atlases. To reach this objective, I have conducted a two-way analysis. The first part of the research was focused on the cartographic representation of Spain, and the second part was on the use of Croatian exonyms for Croatian features in Spain. So before I present my research, let me tell you just in a few words about the production of world atlases in Croatia. Actually, it's relatively limited, especially regarding atlases for general use, since the first world atlas in the Croatian language was printed in the late 19th century. Only about 20 comprehensive world atlases have been issued. Most of them consist of translated and slightly adapted maps, in some cases with additional maps of Yugoslavia before, of course, and later of Croatia. Very few general atlases were produced entirely in Croatia, and the most comprehensive domestic atlases were made at the Miroslav Krleja Institute of Lexicography, where I work. with the first edition printed in 1961 and the last 7th edition in 2006. So let me go back to the research. Firstly, I have analyzed a dozen of selected school and general atlases, translated and domestic ones. The first is Kotzen's Geographical Atlas for Secondary School. It is the first atlas published in Croatian language and was printed in Zagreb in 1887. It is translated and shortened version of the original Atlas of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy issued in Vienna. Its main purpose was an educational one, so it was edited according to the school curriculum. It consists of 31 maps, mostly of European countries. Here you can see the contents. To understand such a distribution of maps, it is important to emphasize that Croatia was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy at the time, so it is no surprise that Central European countries dominate the atlas. They were represented in significantly more maps than other countries, usually as parts of larger regions, such as Central Europe or Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Only a few countries were rendered individually: Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and Italy. However, Spain is not one of them. It is shown only on 3 small-scale maps with very few details. The first 2 maps show the whole of Europe, as you can see. These are the physical map and the political map of Europe. And due to small scale, only up to 20 Spanish toponyms are put on the map. The third map depicts the Mediterranean region. As explained in the preface of the Kotzen's Atlas, there was no need for an extra map of the Iberian Peninsula because the curriculum had not required it. The same explanation goes for the missing maps of Scandinavian Peninsula and Switzerland. The number of Spanish toponyms is around 4 times higher than on the earlier maps here on this map. The second edition of this atlas, by the name Kotzen's Geographical Atlas for Secondary School, was issued in 1911 and 1919. It is a significantly changed edition, with 78 large maps and 199 additional small maps on 51 double pages. European countries are shown on 28 sheets. 11 of them show the countries that are part of Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Spain is also represented in more detail than in the first edition. It is depicted on 4 sheets, 3 containing the physical, political, and linguistic maps of Europe, and the separate one of the Iberian Peninsula, plus 6 additional maps of smaller regions or particular locations, as you can see on this slide. After Kotzen's atlases, most general and school atlases follow the tradition of representing the Iberian Peninsula on one separate map, if having it at all, but never solely Spain. As an example, here are maps showing Spain in the 7th edition of the World Atlas of the Lexicographical Institute. Many atlases kept the map of Mediterranean, either as a sort of compensation map for not having a map of the Iberian Peninsula, or as an additional map of a larger Mediterranean region to which Croatia belongs as well, due to the locational, natural, historical, and cultural similarities with other Mediterranean countries. So, depending on the purpose of the atlas, Spain is represented in 3 ways. A, only on the map of the Mediterranean. B, on the maps of the Mediterranean and the Iberian Peninsula. And C, only on the map of the Iberian Peninsula. Secondly, I have analyzed the use of Croatian exonyms for geographical features in Spain. This analysis was based on maps in the most influential Croatian general world atlases and the list of contemporary and historical exonyms published in 2018. The most represented are exonyms for the geographical features in Greece due to the importance and longevity of ancient Greek toponyms in the historical, cultural, and linguistic landscape of Europe. The second ranking is Russia, due to the stronger cultural influence of the Russian language in the past. For example, in its role as a significant intermediary language from other Slavic and non-Slavic languages to Croatian. Moreover, it's the world's largest country, so Russia has many extensive global important geographical features with exonyms in many languages, not only in Croatia. But here it is very important to mention that many of these exonyms in Croatian are just phonetically adapted Russian names. The third country is Italy, due to the vicinity of Italy and the long-standing political, cultural, and economic relations between Croatian littoral and Italy, or Venice in the past. The fourth ranking country is Germany, due to the strong historical and contemporary cultural and economic relations with Germany, especially after the Second World War. But Croats also went to Germany for educational and cultural purposes since the 19th century. Less than 20 exonyms are registered in the geographically, culturally, politically, and linguistically remote countries such as Iceland, Cyprus, Portugal, Estonia, Sweden. Spain belongs to the group with approximately 40 to 50 exonyms, alongside Switzerland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Turkey. It is a large and culturally influential country on the global scale, especially in the linguistic domain, so it could be expected to have more Croatian exonyms than it has. Nevertheless, from a Croatian viewpoint, it's especially a rather distant country. Besides, Croats can easily read and correctly pronounce, we hope it's correctly pronounced, Spanish toponyms, so there was no need for adapting them to Croatian. Thus, the majority of Spanish names are preserved in their original forms. Out of 45 Croatian names for geographical features in Spain, many are double, meaning that the same name is used for two geographical features, the historical region and current administrative unit, such as Andalusia or Galicia. The largest and most important landforms are also frequently used and have their Croatian names, such as Aragon Basin or Meseta Central. Some of them are spreading outside the Spanish boundaries. The most important natural and cultural regions also have Croatian names, such as Mediterranean. And there are only two Croatian names for Spanish cities, Jerez, I don't know if I pronounce it right, and Valencia. And they are both obsolete and replaced with antonyms now. Interestingly, the names of rivers have always been used in their original form. All in all, more cultural than natural features have their Croatian names. The exceptions are huge landforms. The oldest Croatian exonyms have been used since the first newspapers and geographic textbooks in the Croatian language, which were issued at the beginning of the 19th century, thus even before the first translated atlases. There are few types of adapting the names in Croatian. The names of historical regions were usually adapted in a way to preserve the phonetic form of the roots and add the Croatian ending ia. So you have Andalusia, Galicia, Catalonia. Some names were made by translating common names and adding Croatian proper names, such as Andalusko Gorje, Južna Europa, Stara Kastilja. Few names have phonetic form of the root and Croatian ending i or ska. Baleari, Španjolska, Pyrenees. Also, a few names were made from traditionally Croatian names with a trace of the original roots, Estremadura, Navarra, and only two names are fully translated names, Središnja Visoravan, Sredozemlje. So to conclude, the research has pointed out the following. The representation of Spain in Croatian atlases is rather weak. Croats have not adopted many Spanish antonyms, and if they did, these exonyms refer to the most important and the largest geographical features with frequently used names, which implies limited cultural relations. The main reason is a significant locational distance between Spain and Croatia, despite the common belonging to the Mediterranean culture. Although cultural relations were quite intensive in some periods of the Middle Ages and early modern history, especially while both territories were under the Habsburg rule, they were weaker than the relations with the neighboring countries. Regarding economic relations in the past, it is known that the trading between the Republic of Dubrovnik and the Spanish cities was long-lasting and fruitful. Nowadays, Spain is the 14th most important country in overall Croatian economic relations with other countries. In addition, there have not been major migrations between the two countries. Mutual relations have mostly been reduced to individuals or smaller groups of immigrants who were educated or were culturally, scientifically, or politically active abroad. Nevertheless, the relations are improving lately, especially in the expanding tourism sector. So I will finish by inviting all of you, not only our Spanish colleagues, to be a part of this positive touristic trend and to visit the beautiful Croatian landscapes. Thank you very much.
So much, and that was awesome. We'll take questions at the end, so please stay on the line.
Okay.
Ivana. And then our last, but definitely not least, speaker of this awesome conference is Estrella Díez on Spanish toponymic generics borrowed by North American English. Can you hear us?
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you can
Hello.
hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know, so I cannot hear you very well. So because I'm
sorry.
having like audio issues during the whole Congress, so just to minimize problems, I will kindly ask the organizers to go ahead and show my pre-recorded video presentation, if you don't mind.
No problem. One moment.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hello everybody, and thanks for attending my presentation. My name is Estrella Díez. I'm an Spaniard, but I moved to Canada 8 years ago. Being a student at the French campus of the University of Alberta, one of my professors, the Toponyms Dr. Ivana, picked me as a system for a research on French generics borrowed by American English. The idea of starting a research on Spanish generics began after we finished the research on French generics, and I decided to focus my master's thesis on this subject. My preliminary exploration highlighted the lack of work in Spanish generics in the United States, particularly the Toponyms focused the research on specifics rather than generics. Generics, as we know, designate geographical entities, while specifics are the proper names. In Colorado River, the river is the generic, while Colorado is the specific, as opposed to the case of the French generics that I could benefit from the path taken by other researchers. With the Spanish, I had to start from scratch. In the United States, place names are everywhere. The official U.S. database houses over 2,270,000 official place names. I could not approach the acronic or historical exploration. This scope will be too large. I was left with only the synchronic path, that is, attempting an identification on generic without historical exploration of any kind. My primary research tool was the United States National Toponyms Database, the one that we use for research on French generics. I kept the same geographical research area as in the French generic study. By keeping the same area, we would be able to compare the results of the French and Spanish generic studies. This research area is composed by the continental United States of America. Would it be possible to identify true Spanish generic borrowing with only the U.S. official place name database as a corpus? And how could I do it? First, I had to establish a suitable theoretical framework and a methodology. Key to my theoretical framework was establishing a working definition for lexical borrowing. Lexical borrowing is a word from language A that has been incorporated from language B. In the specific case of this study, it is a Spanish word integrated into English. Borrowing is the final phase of an integration process. If the borrowed word can undergo phonetic or orthographic alteration, it must be well understood and well used by users of the borrowing language. Everything just stated applies to the toponymic generics. With the question of the definition of borrowing resolved, I needed to find a list of generics and develop a method to identifying possible borrowed generics from Spanish. My starting point was an exhaustive list of geographic generics used in the database managed by the United States Board on Geographic Names, USBGN, the authority in charge of officializing and standardizing place names. The most recent and complete list is the one published in 1987. It contains more than 1,500 generics, all origins included. To extract the desired loans from this list, I use a succession of precise sorts: cognitive, subjective, etymological, linguistic, functional, and epistemological. The first three sorts intended to clean up the original USBN list, keeping generics of Spanish origin and eliminating full generics. This list was reduced to 30 generics. At the end of this third sort, I began to create my corpus of toponyms relevant to the discrimination of true borrowing after querying the US database. The fourth sorting, called functional, consisted in discarding from my corpus of toponyms whole Spanish words did not act as a generic, but I still had to develop a fifth sort called epistemological to target Anglo-American place names, because the place names that Americans had adopted from Spanish did not allow me to conclude that these generics were indeed understood by English speakers. The fifth sort took into account the hybridity of the toponyms. The categories that have been established are the following. A linguistic hybrid toponym, HL, is one composed of a Spanish generic and a specific expressed in a complete different language: English, French, indigenous languages, etc., as in Black Mesa. A syntactic hybrid toponym, HF, is a toponym whose generic and specific are expressed in Spanish, but in which the syntax-specific plus generic type accommodates better the syntax of the English style, as in Negro Mesa. An adoption is a toponym completely expressed in Spanish that displays the syntax of the generic plus specific type typical of Spanish toponyms. As in Mesa Negra, adoption does not prove an understanding of generic by English speakers, and its exclusion. Note that adoption is included as a contrast and clear case of non-hybridity. The result of all these sorts is a corpus composed only by hybrid toponym H, that is, a corpus composed only by linguistic and syntactic hybrid toponyms. What were the results of my research after applying the 5 different sorts? Some generics were discarded due to the absence or too few hybrid toponyms displaying them. Ultimately, from the sorting, only 3 generics of Spanish origin were found to be true borrowing: Mesa, Arroyo, and Canyon. Here are some details about each of them. First, Mesa. Mesa is present in 1,396 hybrid toponyms. We see them listed by region. The first pie chart displays the hybrid adoption ratio. The second displays the ratio of hybrids according to whether they are linguistic or syntactic. These 1,396 hybrid toponyms are found in 16 states, primary Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Note that in New Mexico, synthetic hybrids and adoptions are almost equally numbered. If we now turn to generic arroyo, we see that it is present in 410 hybrid toponyms. Of the three Spanish generic borrowed, arroyo is the only one present in more adoptions than hybrids. The hybridity analyzed shows that 1 out of 4 hybrid toponyms is a syntactic hybrid. Although these 410 hybrid names are found in 9 states, they are concentrated mainly in Colorado and New Mexico. It is in the latter states, as well as California, that number of adoptions exceeds the number of hybrids. Kenyan is the all-time champion of borrowed Spanish generics. It's present in 21,577 toponyms, of which 21,068 are hybrids. 2% of first names are adoptions. In terms of hybridity, linguistic hybrids are clearly superior to syntactic hybrids. The ratio is about 10 to 1. These more than 20,000 hybrid toponyms are spread across 31 states. The location of color dots on this map shows the wide distribution. The yellow dots represent hybrid first names displaying the term canyon. They are clearly visible in all of the Appalachian region, although they are more concentrated in west and south. Here, we also observe the lesser diffusion of mesa in blue, and even lesser of arroyo represented by red dots. Let's move to the discussion. Firstly, of a theoretical nature. In the field of linguistic borrowing, there are two concepts that are not sufficiently addressed: frequency and diffusion. Frequency. From how many occurrences on words can a generic be considered as borrowed? Some authors only pointed out that borrowing is characterized by frequent usage. This is not very objective. In the field of geography, a borrowed generic can only be used by the namer if he or she is in front of the entity that this generic describes. Sometimes specific geomorphological features are very rare, as in the case of Geyser, which is a generic borrowed by English from Icelandic. In a research, should generics such as Potrero, Cañada, or Rincon be considered borrowing? The number of entities limits the number of possible occurrences. What are numerical boundaries of borrowing? Linguists seem to be comfortable with this imprecision. Diffusion. Over what geographical area must a borrowed generic be present for it to be called borrowing rather than residualism? The three Spanish borrowed generics, as well as the French generics, are almost absent east of the Appalachians. We observe a concentration of hybrid first names carrying arroyo and mesa in the southern and southwestern states. By contrast, canyons present throughout the west, and it is found in Alaska. Why would these Appalachian nominators prefer to use generics like dew or hollow to name these canyon-like features? Is there a rejection of borrowing in the East Appalachian region in the New England states? Secondly, although this research has fraught with difficulties and obstacles, it was shown that it is possible to identify Spanish generics borrowed by American English on the basis of a synchronic study of official place names. But it's also true that diachronic research would be necessary in order to fully understand the dynamics of a generic borrowing. This research would support or qualify the results they have presented. Analyzing the evolution of toponyms would provide a better understanding of the reality of generic borrowing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was really well done. So now it's time for discussion, and I sure many of you have questions. I have questions as well, so, but I want to open the floor. Any questions? Thank you to all of our presenters. This is. Oh,
Maybe was it's about Croatian names.
one second.
Croatian presentation on Spain.
Okay, I'll let Ivana, are you still there? Okay, so there's a question coming. I haven't heard it yet, but just getting you ready. Here we go.
It was a very interesting presentation. I wonder if there are some Croatian adaptations, I understand, from Spanish names or words. Now, in Holland, we have some known forms. Some Polish toponyms are filtered by Germany, as it were. So that means Warszawa has been borrowed by Holland in the Dutch, in a German period. So Germany was a kind of its mediator. Is something like this also the case in Croatia and Spain? I mean, between them is Italy, which is a big area. I could imagine that maybe there was some Italian intermediation between the two countries.
Absolutely. Great question. So Ivana, the question is, broadly, are there any Croatian adaptations from Spanish words? But more specifically, and I guess interestingly, based on the experience of the Dutch, for example, have Polish words that have been kind of filtered through Germany. So they've been first, roughly translated by Germans and then migrated their way or diffused into the Netherlands, as I understand it. And so the question is, has Croatian adopted any Spanish toponyms? But also, if so, like, did Italy or some other cultural influence kind of filter them so they're not direct transliterations? Does that make sense?
No, I wouldn't know exactly because, as I mentioned, many toponyms were adopted through these models that are pretty much you can find everywhere with these endings, Croatian endings. So, for example, if it's Baskia or Andalusia, it is very similar to Spanish names. So. I don't know if there was an intermediary language, for example, like Italian in between. If that was the question, I'm not sure that I understand very clearly, but if that's the case, because I think they are very, we can pronounce them very easily. We can hear them and just adopt it to some Croatian rules, and I think that was mainly the case.
Okay, well, great. And actually, I forgot to mention that the person said it was a great talk. So well done. And
thank you.
so it's okay. It's what someone once told me. Smart people always say, "I don't know," because actually, it's better to say that than to have an answer that isn't right. And it's a really open-ended question. So, well done. Another question in the back is that.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Estrella. Explains the spatial distribution of Spanish generics are mainly by the colonial heritage. Because the recent migration of Spanish to the United States some impact on Spanish generics. I know that labor migrants are behaving rather inactive as regards the last placements, but there's always some impact.
Yes. And correct me if I repeat the question incorrectly, please. So Estrella, the question is, again, great talk, but the question is about the distribution of place names via colonial heritage. And so Peter was asking if perhaps perhaps the place names are there from original Spanish colonialism, as well as perhaps more contemporary Spanish settlers. Was that your question, Peter? Okay, yeah. So, or could there be a more contemporary reason as well?
So, because my research was only with the official, so now toponyms. So yeah, I think that there is both of them, maybe. But I have the picture of the toponyms now in the official database. So I think that some of them can come from the original settlers that went there, but other ones were maybe used by English speakers. And yeah, so I think it's a combination. Sometimes it's pretty I don't know, interesting because the specific is keeping in Spanish, but the generic has been translated into English. So, for example, Colorado River, the example that I have given for explaining the toponym composition. But in other toponyms like Rio Grande, both of them are keeping Spanish, and they are both keeping the structure, the syntax of a Spanish toponym. So why these differences are shown in the database in toponyms? Why is this present in the database or in the toponyms nowadays? I don't know, but for me, yes, I think there is both of them. But let's say the focus of the research was to eliminate what normal nowadays or in the past Spanish settlers were able to name. So, for example, if this is why Mesa Negra for me is not something that I have to be considered and is an adoption, because it looks like too much Spanish. So an English speaker will say something different, or when they are changing the order, they are adapting to their own language. So they can see a path from Spanish to English in some way. So yeah, both of them, I think, is historical and also present.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes. It's hard to tell with the mask. Is that Philip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mentioned by Eric. I was wondering if you are also doing research on the narratives of nations between maps and says, oh, you know, they need German, and it says how they are choose and what is choose.
But this comes under the structural element of the other gate, where I look into the parts that are depicted in a kind of semantic block of the atlas. And of course, if you have inside maps, this is a stronger ML gate because you try to explain it more in depth a certain aspect that then requires map. I haven't operationalized that properly yet. So it's more the connection between different elements, and instant maps are a special element. They may be treated as part of the map, but if I look into kind of the West American word atlases after the American Spanish War, these instant maps came the newly required colonies that have then been insert maps on the overview maps of the United States. And this is, of course, a where you had, before the French-American War, you had just the United States and you had Alaska as one inset map. So that was the normal United States, and Alaska is inset because the tip of the map, of course. And after the beginning of the imperialism of the United States, with the three acquired not colonies but territories, like Puerto Rico was then on the map, and the Philippines were on the map, and Hawaii were on the map. So there is a change, of course, in this particular overview map of the United States, which then reflects, of course, another narrative, that of American imperialism.
I have a question for Malak. So you mentioned my background is education, so I picked up on this, but training Hungarian teachers to say the place names correctly, and I was thinking, have you thought about how that might be done? I mean, that actually seems like kind of a cool, maybe ICA type project where toponyms, pronunciation in the native language, database where you can click on it. Or, so I don't know, have you thought about that? Would it be like a webinar series for Hungarian teachers? Or?
It is a good idea. I would love to. As far as
Yeah.
but it would be, and it's a training not only on it teachers, which are geographical, have state background. So it would be, and for instance, different students that are they have a class or course on a certain background. That's the
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, it got me thinking, like, because dictionaries online, you can click, automated voice says it, but anyway, awesome talks. Other questions from the audience? Okay, I have one final question, Eric. You're not going to get out of here that easily. No, so no, actually, I had it's more a thought, but the red on the German map, right, and from red being aggressive, which is generally used in propaganda, to red being representing us, I found that really interesting. And just going back to my geopolitical studies, I was thinking about Lebensraum and the Ratzel theory, and red representing blood and kind of living. Do you think there's a connection there, or was it just like they decided to switch the colors? I mean, obviously this is all speculation, but it was interesting to me that they switched the coloration, pretty quickly right there.
Well, in every stage. So
Yeah.
every of these interwar ethnographic maps, you have the red as the we, or the predominant ethnic group, mainly, that is shown in red. It could be the blood theory.
It's a little out there. I know, but Ratzel was out there.
It's not too far away, but I assume that red is, of course, the color you recognize the most. Right. You have different colors, and then of course, if you do like on a Hungarian map, if you use red and use yellow for German, and they did a printing of different layers, so they did kind of dot maps.
Yeah.
And on that dot map, the red dots overprinted the yellow ones. So the yellow ones were there, but the red ones in the program, they overprinted the yellow ones. So the impression of that particular map of then Budapest at that time is that there are not many Germans there, but if you count the points at the overprinted points, which you can hardly recognize, then that gives you a different picture. But red is that dominant.
Right.
If you have it with other colors, that this is probably the more visual aspect of showing this.
Okay.
So the signal color.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I know printing colors were quite back then too. They weren't quite as nuanced as they are today, obviously. Without any other questions, anyone else? Last chance. Okay. Thank you for the session, and now I don't know. Now we will 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Thank you. 5-minute break, and thanks again to all the presenters, including those online. Awesome job. Thank you.